Quadratics Part 5. So far, in Quadratics Part 2, you guys learned how to find the solutions of a quadratic using the square root. And then Quadratics Part 3 and Part 4 walk you through some of the various factoring strategies that we can use to find these solutions. Now, sometimes you are not going to be able to factor every single equation. So you are going to have to use something called the quadratic formula, which is going to look like this. Now, once again, this is still another strategy to find the solutions of a quadratic. The solutions are the same as the x-intercepts if you graphed this. We can also call these the roots, or we can call these the zeros. So once again, factoring and quadratic formula are the same exact different strategies to get to the same answer, to get to your solutions. So we're first going to solve these problems with both factoring and the quadratic formula so you can see that they get the same answer. On day 2 and day 3 though, factoring will be impossible and only the quadratic formula can be used. So let's do this factoring. If I see x squared and regular x, one side must be equal to 0 before I can start factoring. I'm going to take my x squared in the top corner. I'm going to take my constant, my regular number in the bottom corner, and I will start working it out. The only way to get x squared is x times x. Oh, and now we have to figure out how do we split this up. So we'll do our puzzle. So we want to know what's going to multiply to -6 and add or subtract to the number out front here, which we assume is the 1. It looks like we'll use 3 and 2. 3 times 2 is +6, so let's see if we make this negative. 3 times -2 is now -6. 3 minus 2 is 1. So that splits this up into 3x and -2x. And now we'll keep going. So x times x was the only way to get x squared. X times 3 is the only way to get 3x down there. X times -2, the only way to make that happen. -2 times 3 works out. So we see our factors here. And then we can set each of these equal to 0 to get our solutions. So we'll add 2. So we have x equals +2. And then we'll subtract 3. So we know when we go over to the quadratic formula, we only did it correctly if we get 2 and -3 as our solutions. Now, in order to use the quadratic formula, we need a, b, and c. Now you are always going to get a from the number out front of x squared. B is always the number out front of the regular variable, and c will always be the constant. So a is +1, b is +1, c is going to be -6 here. And now we're just going to plug that into the quadratic formula. So what I'm going to do to help myself out is I'm going to take every single letter that I see, and I'm first just going to turn it into a parentheses. So I'm going to have a negative parentheses, plus or minus the square root of some number squared, -4 parentheses, parentheses, all of which is over 2 times a parentheses. So all I did to start was I took every single letter and I turned them into parentheses, so now we can place them. So the first 2 parentheses need my b value. B is 1. Then I need a and c. So I have a and c. And then I need another a down there. So another a. Notice I only used the numbers out front. I did not use x squared or x. And now it's time to simplify this down. So x is equal to, so that's just going to be -1 plus or minus the square root of, well, of 1 squared is 1 times 1. -4 times 1 is -4, times -6 is +24. 2 times 1 is 2. Now, before we can proceed, we need to get one number underneath the square root. So 1 plus 24 is going to give us that 25. So I just rewrote it up there so I have a little bit more space. Now at this point, we have 2 different answers. We're going to get a positive and -1. So once we get to one answer here, we're going to split this up into 2 cases. The first case is going to get the plus sign, The second one will get that minus sign. We're just splitting it up. Now everything else will be the same. -1 goes out front. Square root of 25. And both are still divided by 2. All we did is we took this and we broke it into 2, except one gets the plus sign and one gets the minus sign, and we can keep going from here. Now the square root of 25 is 5. So we'll have -1 plus 5 over 2, -1 minus 5 over 2. -1 plus 5 is 4, divided by 2 is 2. -1 minus 5 is -6, divided by 2 is -3. And you'll notice we got the same answer as when we factored. The same answer across the board. Let's try it one more. We're gonna find these solutions with factoring and then the quadratic formula, just to get some good practice with these quadratic skills. Now I see we have n squared and regular n, so I know this side needs to be 0 before I can start. So I'm gonna move this over. So that's positive, we'll subtract. Good, now that one side is equal to 0, we are ready to factor. N squared will always go in my top corner. My number will go in that bottom one. And then we'll use our puzzle over here to figure out the other 2 squares. So what's gonna multiply to -24 and add or subtract to -2? I know 6 and 4, 6 times 4 gets me 24. If I make that a -6, now that multiplies to a negative answer, and -6 plus 4 is -2. So that'll fill out the rest of the puzzle. -6n, positive 4n. The only way to get n squared is n times n. N times -6 will get me to -6n. N times 4 will get me to 4n. 4 times -6 works out down there. So we see our factors will be n plus 4 and n minus 6. You set your factors equal to 0 to actually get your solutions. So one answer will be -4 and one answer will be +6. Now let's see if we can get to the same exact answer with the quadratic formula. Now with the quadratic formula, one side still must be equal to 0. So I'm going to copy this part of the equation down where we already did that work. Just like with factoring, one side of the equation must be equal to 0 before you start either strategy. So now we can try this with the quad form. We need A, B, and C. A is always the number out front of n squared. B is the number out front of the regular linear variable. C will always be your straight up number constant. So I'm going to set up the quadratic formula now. X is equal to negative parentheses plus or minus the square root of parentheses squared minus 4 parentheses parentheses, all of which is over 2 times the parentheses. So all I did is I took every single variable and I just turned them into parentheses to make it easy. The first 2 numbers are B, which is my -2. And then I need AC, A, and C, including the negatives. Those are very important, all of which is over 2A again. And now let's start simplifying. If we have a negative and negative, that's going to be a +2, plus or minus the square root of -2 squared is -2 times itself, so it'll be a +4. Negative times a negative is a positive. -4 times 1 is -4, times -24 will be a +96. 2 times 1 is 2. We need one number underneath the parentheses, 2 plus or minus 100 over 2. I'm running out of space, so I'm just going to rewrite this up here. Plus or minus the square root of 100 over 2. Now, once we get to one number underneath here, we're going to make our 2 different cases. One with the plus sign, one with the minus sign. Everything else is the same. 2 square root of 100 over 2. 2 square root of 100 over 2. We're going to copy that down exactly, except one gets the plus sign, the other one gets the minus sign. Now the square root of 100 is 10. 2 plus 10 is 12. Divided by 2 is positive 6. Square root of 100 is 10. 2 minus 10 is negative 8. Divided by 2 is negative 4. And you'll notice we got the same answer as factoring as we did with the quadratic formula.